One of the main draws of JRPGs for me comes from the multitude of bosses faced along the way. They represent a seemingly insurmountable obstacle to overcome and will frequently work in tandem with a narrative to create something that lives long in the memory. Now, memorable bosses for me are not all about mechanics, it's also elements like the music, the story, the build-up, the theatre. Boss fights are an opportunity for it all to come together, a chance for the game to stamp your brain with a lasting vision of the adventure. Now, there are going to be big spoilers in this video for the games mentioned, simply because we'll be touching on many late game bosses. Speaking of which, as much as I wanted to mention Cold Steel 4 here, which also has a bunch of memorable boss fights for me, I have to give the spot to Azure Demiurgus from Trails to Azure. It's no secret, Azure is my favourite Trails game and one of my most beloved games of all time. The way it ends is one big reason for that. It's an awesome game with an equally epic story that also sticks its landing. Everything comes together so well, especially its final boss fight. Initially, the build-up is superb. By this point, the true nature of Kia has been revealed, and this is where one of my favourite developments in all of JRPGs occurs. That Kia had used her power to save the SSS in Trails from Zero, effectively resetting the timeline and ensuring that it wouldn't happen again. However, it was also hinted by Mario Belcroix that Kia's powers had the subconscious effect of making all those who interacted with her love her as well. Now, considering we see the SSS be extremely protective of Kia following her effective adoption, it's no wonder that she starts to believe this. The possibility that the intimacy she receives from others may be manufactured by her powers as the Septarian of Zero causes Kia to lose control and be consumed by the Azure Demiurgus. And it's not just the build-up to the fight that is masterful, because it delivers in the gameplay department too. Azure Demiurgus has a bunch of nasty moves, including an instant wipe ability in its second form, and a move that causes a party member to vanish from the field entirely. On higher difficulty levels, it's not a walk in the park by any stretch, but what really elevates the fight to god tier for me is the music. Azure Arbitrator remains in my top 5 Falcom songs to this day. It is the perfect rendition to pump me up for the fight. It ticks many boxes, plus the conclusion after the fight ties a neat bow on the top 2. Lloyd uses a bit of the talk no jutsu to convince Kia that her powers weren't the reason that she was adored by the SSS, and she eventually returns to them as a normal girl. It still remains one of my favourite sequences in gaming, and no one's going to convince me otherwise. A masterful ending to a masterful game. And when we mention masterful games, it is only right to jump to Chrono Trigger as well. Yet again, it will be the big bad of the game that takes the spot, which is the alien parasite Lavos. For me, it's the build-up surrounding Lavos that makes the fight impactful. Chrono Trigger is all about time travel, going across the same map through different eras, yet no matter what time period you end up in, Lavos is there in some respect. The threat of this creature is introduced not through direct confrontation but through ominous hints and foreshadowing. The game slowly reveals its influence across different time periods, making it feel like an unstoppable force beyond human comprehension, this idea that even moving through time is not enough to escape it. And what really drives it home to me here is that Lavos is not some sort of mastermind. It's not a character with deep plans or stratagems to outsmart the protagonists. It's simply an otherworldly threat that has the sole purpose of spreading its influence throughout the universe, and it will accomplish that by draining the planet of its essence. This kind of eldritch representation is drilled home further by its design. It's both grotesque and fascinating. It first appears as a spiky insectoid shell, then transforms into increasingly humanoid forms during the final battle. I was getting reminders of base form Cell from Dragon Ball Z here. That's an Akira Toriyama design if I've ever seen one. Now, in terms of fighting Lavos, this is also very interesting to work with. Lavos destroys the world in 1999 AD, and if you're playing on your first run, there's very little chance that you can beat it here. There's also the fight at the Ocean Palace, which leads to the sacrifice of Chrono and the very worthwhile subquest to bring him back to life. And then of course you have the fight right at the end of the game where you are supposedly strong enough to take him on, split into a number of phases, beat the shell to get inside and eventually destroy the core of the beast. Chrono Trigger remains my favourite retro game to date. It is the one that I feel has endured time better than all the others, which is ironic when you think about it. And one big reason for that is Lavos. Now we're going to be moving over from a world-ending threat to a more personal duel between two characters. It's Tales of the Abyss, and the best boss fight in this game, bar none, is the battle against Ash near the end of the game. Not the most difficult, but it's not all about difficulty for me in these fights. In fact, I place more importance on the build-up, the cinema, the theatre. If a game creates an environment and build-up that works in tandem with an engaging story, then it's very likely that I will find myself a fan of it, and this fight between Luke and Ash is one such event. I've made no secret that I am a fan of Luke. He is tied as my favourite protagonist in Tales of, along with Velvet. I feel that this guy has not only a well-developed story, but earned development. Luke may be an arse in the early stages, but even in those moments you can still see the points where he draws a line. The essence of good and redemption is already there. But there's no doubt that due to his sheltered upbringing, he has that inferiority complex, which is highlighted further by his interactions with Ash. Ash, on the other hand, was the original Luke von Fabre, but due to kidnapping and being replaced by the replicant Luke, he has lost everything. It turns him into a bitter individual, seeking to reclaim his identity, and he sees the clone who replaced him as the source of many of his problems. It's a battle that is built up from the very early stages of Abyss. It is revisited, it develops and evolves so that when they both draw their swords against each other in the final dungeon, it has far greater meaning and significance in the ethos of the story of Abyss. It's very much a clash of wills, to see whose determination and resolve is stronger, and though I've seen many games do this before, very few do it as good as Abyss. Now, if we're talking about spectacle and build-up, I think this is the time to bring in one of the more unorthodox entries, because you're not fighting a singular enemy here, and you're not aiming to destroy them either. You're instead trying to protect a singular point in order to break free of some sort of purgatory. It's the final battle at Sakura Ward in 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. If we're talking about masterful storytelling, then Aegis Rim has it on lockdown. It is brilliantly crafted, very well executed, and for me, is timeless. Players will look at this game in 10 years' time and still hold it in very high regard. One big reason for that is its final fight, which thematically is perfection. By this point, you've played through all of the story routes of the 13 protagonists, you've seen their individual arcs, but you've also been piecing together the true situation facing the group. These protagonists are all clones that in reality are confined to incubation pods, and have lived in a simulation that acted as a sort of archive of human history. So when they eventually land on a terraformed planet to repopulate as part of the initiative called Project Ark, they have the knowledge to make it happen. This simulation was called Universal Control, and effectively housed 5 different eras, the 5 most pivotal in human history, in order to impart knowledge on the clones. This was the intended result of Project Ark. The truth, though, is that the source code for Universal Control had been usurped many years prior and rewritten into a sort of death game via the D code, which is why we see the Deimos attacks. This eventual climactic fight is not only one to save the clones, but also a fight to ensure humanity can live on. And it is one heck of a fight. It feels never-ending, overwhelming, and engaging. An accurate representation of few fighting against many. An almost impossible task that cannot be failed. And of course it does end happily as the simulation is shut down and the clones awaken on their new planet. The beauty of this though is that the 13 protagonists we play as were not the only clones sent out. There were countless other exocrafts spread throughout the universe that had been travelling for equally as long. How many survived? How many years had passed since Project Ark began? So many questions are left open-ended, yet the conclusion is still satisfying. Aegis Rim is one of the greatest stories I have experienced, and this final fight cements that legacy. No doubt, I have an inordinate amount of love for the final fight in Aegis Rim, which in turn makes it memorable. Yet, not every fight is memorable for the right reasons, and we're going to be talking about one such fight right now. It's from an older game, the first of a long-running action-centric series, and it is one of the most frustrating battles I've seen in a JRPG. That boss is Dark Fact from Ys 1. There are many bosses that are difficult but fair. I always maintain that Souls-likes often strike that balance very well, and that in turn makes them satisfying. And then there are bosses like this one. The difficulty of Dark Fact purely comes down to a bunch of frustrating elements all being combined together. This is an infamous fight among those who have played Ys games. It is undoubtedly the hardest fight in the game, and pretty much everything works against the player to turn it into a game of chance. Fighting against Dark Fact is effectively a toss of the coin. If you get unlucky, you will lose. This is because not only does the boss shoot projectiles at you in a relatively small arena, but the arena itself is falling apart. In addition, Dark Fact will be flying all over the place, and the only way to damage him is to get up close and personal. Easier said than done if you can't read his flight patterns and the arena is full of holes. Even more hilarious, or frustrating depending on who you are, the fight is made more difficult at a higher frame rate. It was a fight quite literally not designed for 60 FPS. It is without question my least favourite boss battle in an Ys game, but it kind of worked in its favour because it sticks in my mind even now. Not many battles in the series have that on us, so well done. No doubt, Dark Fact is a tough fight, but for the wrong reasons. Like I say, I've got no issue with a tough fight if it's fair. And oh boy, Baten Kaitos Origins has plenty of those. The prequel to the original game, Baten Kaitos Origins, is an awesome entry, turn-based style with deck builder mechanics, one of Monolith Soft's forgotten titles. The original had all the staples I'd look for in a JRPG, amazing music, beautifully realised world, and a decent story. And for the most part, the second game was of the same calibre. Yet the biggest change was in the combat itself. It was effectively overhauled completely outside of some common elements. While the Magnus was still used as the core of the system, the method in which you used your cards was different, and this resulted in a much faster combat approach. The emphasis on combos became more prominent in Origins, and in order to deal the higher levels of damage, you had to use some of your higher end finishers, which are only accessed via stringing a combo together. It meant you would often be cycling through your cards and discarding them at a rapid pace in order to find the setup you needed, all in real time while the enemy was pounding your sorry behind. Now, I loved the new combat approach. It was exciting to work with, yet there were instances where because of it, the difficulty spiked wildly. So heavily in fact that it sometimes bordered on unfair. It never encroached into that territory, but it skirted the line. And the one boss that epitomised that was Gilo during the time skip. Gilo for most of the game is one of your main party members, but was originally designed as one of the 4 weapons that would destroy the ancient god Malpesio, which is what we are made aware of in this jump back in time. Due to story developments, this version of Gilo, this past version, eventually attacked the party. And you know what happened? I got destroyed. I was destroyed so badly at first that I thought you were meant to lose the battle. In my mind it had all the characteristics of a scripted fight. So I tried, got the death, and was ready to see the story progress. But Origins hit me with a slap of realisation. It gave me instead the game over screen. And then I realised, this was not scripted. This was an actual boss fight that I had to win. Well, fuck me, right? This fight took me many tries to get down. Gilo hits quickly, it has some extremely damaging moves for this point of the game, and even if you're prepared and have all your accessories and decks optimised, you're still going to struggle with it. No doubt it was satisfying when I won, but damn, this was by far and away the toughest fight from both games, and for its difficulty alone, it becomes memorable. Now there's no question that Gilo is tough, but if we're mentioning difficulty, we must also mention Shin Megami Tensei, and for me the one fight that stands out is Lucifer at the end of SMT3 Nocturne. Essentially the secret boss that appears only during the True Demon route, simply unlocking the ability to fight this guy is a challenge. You have to complete the Labyrinth of Amala, which in itself can be stressful, and then after defeating the final boss, Lucifer will appear before you. Lucifer himself has a big role in Nocturne. He often appears in 2 forms before the player, a young boy and an old man, effectively guiding the Demi-Fiend to this eventual conclusion. When the Demi-Fiend defeats the standard final boss Kakutsuchi, his actions have caused the cycle of rebirth to essentially end, meaning that the world is now free of the laws of God. Because of this, God is not happy with the Demi-Fiend, but Lucifer says he will aid him in this fight. He'll only do this though if he deems the Demi-Fiend worthy, and the only way a JRPG tests the might of a protagonist is through a battle, of course. The Lucifer fight is by far and away the most difficult battle the game has. Not the most difficult iteration of Lucifer per se, there are other Megaten games he appears in where he's arguably more difficult, but he takes the crown in Nocturne and is no pushover. As you'd expect, he's got a nasty kit of abilities, like an almighty AoE which also has the certainty to bind, his charm ability, and my personal favourite, Root of Evil, which could hit you with any number of random effects ranging from percentage based damage all the way down to a status ailment. It's a marathon fight too. Lucifer has well over 60,000 HP, which for reference is 3 times the amount that the previous final boss Kagetsuchi had. Taking this guy down felt good, and of course it yields the best ending in Nocturne as well. The next entry is not of the same difficulty as Lucifer, but it is still a memorable one to me, no doubt. It is one of the highlights from the often forgotten title Khemia Alchemist of Valkryja, and it is the Crazed Eye, the manifestation of Vane's inner power that he has voluntarily let go during the good ending. Alchemist of Valkryja, despite its name, is one of the mainline Atelier games, Project A9 in this case. It came during a time when Atelier was in a more experimental phase, and though commercially it almost ended the series entirely, the quality of the game is at a high level. Vane lives out 3 years in Valkryja's academy as he gradually learns to be an alchemist, but during those 3 years, several strange incidents occur centered around Vane himself. It is later revealed that Vane was a creation of his father Theophrastus that has the ability to grant wishes, essentially, and the power of wishes manifests as a second Vane that resides within him. This second Vane, which is essentially the real Vane 2, or at least an extension of him, acts as a subconscious push for him to eventually use his powers throughout the story, eventually culminating in his final wish to make the academy disappear. Now this fight against the Crazed Eye will only occur if you have finished one of the character stories. If you haven't, Vane will sacrifice himself to save his friends and the academy. If you have completed a story though, one of those characters will step forward and break Vane out of his stupor, convincing him to abandon his power and stop it. The fight against Vane in the first phase is quite easy, but the second phase against the untethered Crazed Eye is much more taxing. It's in this fight where the combat shines at its brightest. The turn-based style used in Khemia is already one of the best combat approaches the Atelier series has seen with its use of switching and combos, but in this fight you get to use it all to its maximum. It is the toughest fight in the mainline game, no question to me. But the build-up in terms of what it represents for the story, the culmination of Vane's character arc, the stakes, the music, it all comes together into something grand. Khemia is still a great game even now, and this final fight is one reason for that. Coming into the final two now, and both of them are defined by their spectacle, theatre and story significance. Not difficult fights, but ones that stick in the memory no less, and the first one of those two is the Simone fight from Nier Automata. I remember before Nier Automata even came out, they showed a gameplay trailer featuring this fight, and it single-handedly convinced me to buy the game. And when I finally got there myself, it did not disappoint. Nier Automata's story is defined by its complex and mature themes. It presents them in varying perspectives, depending on what route you happen to be playing through at that time, and Simone is no different. In the first route, you make your way through the theme park, which in itself presents an eerie setting in this post-apocalyptic world. But eventually you're going to end up on a roller coaster and jump into an amphitheatre where the curtain rises revealing Simone. In terms of entrance alone, Simone is memorable. The design, the ominous presence, the music beginning upon her crescendo, that is how you start a boss fight.
What the hell?
Our records don't say anything about a machine like this.
But what makes it so brilliant is, despite coming fairly early on into the game, is that it encompasses everything that defines boss fights in Nier Automata. It's as much about the ongoing story and cinema as it is the challenge of the fight itself. Engels in the prologue was just as striking, but Simone has a slight edge to me due to her more personal story and how the music melds perfectly into her moveset. As the music plays along, you'll notice that Simone's moves change in tandem with it, mirroring this idea that she is a performer of a high caliber, or at least she wants to believe so. And why does she want to be a performer? Why does she go to these lengths? Well, if you play through the other routes, you'll come to understand. These moments of characterization for what is essentially an obstacle in your path are just one of many reasons why Nier Automata is one of the best action RPGs ever made. If the gameplay doesn't capture you, the story and the characters will do so instead. And the final entry of the list will be a boss from Final Fantasy, and it comes from Final Fantasy XVI. I don't care what the naysayers argue, I love this game. It has some issues, it doesn't have the feel of Final Fantasy in some respects either, but I really don't care because the highs of Final Fantasy XVI are out of sight, and many of those highs are attributed to the boss fights. They are some of the best I have ever seen. Square nailed these moments. The build up to them is superb. The spectacle is on another level. There's challenge there, the music is amazing, everything that defines top tier boss fights. Final Fantasy XVI has plenty of them on offer. But there's one that stands above them all in this game, and it's one that sees two brothers fighting together in space, no less. The Bahamut fight takes the final spot. Now mechanically, it's not the deepest, there are a lot of those spamming sequences, the boss itself isn't massively difficult and there are a bunch of cutscenes that play during the battle, but like I've mentioned before, boss mechanics alone do not make a memorable fight for me, and I love much of that aforementioned stuff anyway. I'm fine with the odd cutscene in a boss fight to set the mood. This fight is one of the few times where I have sat forward in my seat because of how awesome it was from start to finish. Bahamut is already my personal favourite summon in Final Fantasy, and it was like Square reached into my brain because they made him the most striking boss of the mainline game. Starting on top of a crystal tower, which was already a beautiful setting anyway, Clive fights alone at first. Then Joshua comes in as the Phoenix. Seeing him fly into the sky again was just goosebumps, man. The hype is real. And yeah, whatever, the gameplay section afterwards is on rails, but I don't care. You're flying above the clouds against frickin' Bahamut, I don't give a shit. Then phase 3 starts. Both brothers fight together on top of the crystal tower again before finally fusing together and ending the fight in space. When I thought the fight had peaked, it would immediately step it up in the next phase. The ascension and spectacle was on another level to anything I've seen in JRPGs. It sung to the little kid in me, the one that grew up watching shows like Dragon Ball Z and Shaman King, where your favourite characters attain the peak of their powers and use it in one epic fight. I couldn't stop smiling during this sequence. Like I say, I was at the edge of my seat for Bahamut, and though I would say there are more mechanically impressive fights in Final Fantasy XVI, Bahamut stands at the peak for me personally because of its theatre and spectacle alone. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.